Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another great episode of Bahrain Now, your source of local initiatives, happenings, talents, and trends. I'm your host, Khalid Hijris, here to walk you through our exciting lineup of segments and personalities from around Bahrain. So don't go away, we'll be right back. Under the patronage of Her Royal Highness Princess Sabika bint Ibrahim Al Khalifa, wife of His Majesty the King and President of the Supreme Council of Women, the Bahrain Society for Children with Behavioral and Communication Difficulties held recently its 6th International Conference under the theme Untangle Autism for a Brighter Future. The conference serves as a dynamic platform for parents, professionals, and caregivers, facilitating the exchange of knowledge and experiences to foster the implementation of holistic treatment approaches. More in this report.
Her Royal Highness the wife of His Majesty the King and President of the Supreme Council of Women, Princess Sabika bint Ibrahim Al Khalifa, deputized the wife of the President of the Royal Rescue and Safety Foundation of Bahrain, His Highness Sheikh Khalifa bin Hamad Al Khalifa, Her Highness Sheikh Naila bint Hamad bin Ibrahim Al Khalifa, to open the 6th International Autism Conference. The conference included several lectures on anticipating the future of others, during which participants discussed the strategies for understanding the challenges of individuals with autism and the importance of early diagnosis and therapeutic intervention to achieve the best results.
They say no one loves you as you are. Another round of bullets hits my skin. It's reaching for the sky of glory. Yeah, that's what we need.
It also included counseling sessions, during which a number of specialists provided consultations to parents and those interested in learning about autism. The conference also included a number of specialized exhibitions, most notably an art exhibition, to showcase the exceptional talents of children with autism.
It's my pleasure to be with you today in this very exciting meeting with a lot of experiences, and brings all these people who are having some experience about autism to deal with this quite important problem. It's striking everybody. Autism became one of the most important disability nowadays.
We are happy to say that this is our 6th conference. If you ask me about the first and now, I can tell you that we have found a lot of changes, which is a positive things. In the beginning when we start, our main concern was for the community, for the people of Bahrain, to know what is autism. It's awareness, because that time, 15 years now, or now we are going to be 20 years, the people, they were afraid to talk about autism. The people were denial to say that I have kids with autism, or they are not denying, but they don't know the sign, they don't know the system, they are not familiar with it. I think these conferences, it really give like a kind of understanding in a simple way, that this is what it means by conference. If you saw these symptoms, you have to take a notice about it. And I think at the same time, when you come to the conference and you see all the mothers and you see other people, you say, I am not alone.
We've been almost every 2 years, we do a conference where we invite the most well-known experts in the field of autism and child difficulties. They introduce their latest studies and finding about autism, and also at the same time in the afternoons they provide consultation for the parents.
an exhibition of services and products to display the latest educational tools designed to support the learning and development of children who suffer from behavioral difficulties. The three-day conference highlights the latest treatments for autism and provides comprehensive strategies for managing the medical and behavioral symptoms, with the aim of improving quality of life and raising community awareness about autism.
Welcome back. And to talk more about that, we are pleased to be joined here at the studio by Dr. Stephen Shore, Clinical Associate Professor of Special Education at Adelphi University, and Russell Lehman, the award-winning advocate for the contextualization autism, mental health disabilities, and the overall human condition. Hello and welcome to you both.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure
Thank you
to
for
be
having
here.
us.
It's a real pleasure to have you guys here. I know that this is a topic that, a lot of people are very passionate about, and it's one with that requires a lot of expertise in it in order to fully understand it. So again, I'm very happy to have you guys here to talk about it. Now, starting with you, Dr. Stephen, this year's conference was dedicated to exploring comprehensive strategies for managing medical and behavioral symptoms, with the aim of significantly enhancing the quality of life for children, adolescents, and young adults affected by autism spectrum disorder. So what can you tell us about the importance of that?
Well, it's vitally important to take a holistic approach to educating and supporting autistic individuals. And this is my second time in Bahrain. I was here in 2019. And what I'm seeing is a greater awareness of autism and the different strategies that we have, both behavioral, educational, medical, and sensory. And something that I find very admirable about the Alia Center is that they focus on matching approaches and techniques to individual needs. And I find that very, very encouraging. Another thing that I find encouraging is that there's a transition from looking at autism as a series of deficits, disorder, and disability, and looking at the abilities of autistic people. And in that way, focusing on and asking the question, what can the autistic person do, supporting and promoting those strengths? And certainly there are significant challenges to being autistic. Both Russell and I know that, being autistic ourselves. And we can't ignore those challenges, those difficulties, as what's in the title. And the idea now is we see these difficulties as barriers, and we need to tear down these barriers to empower the autistic person to use their strengths. And that's very encouraging.
Very brilliantly said, and I think the fact that you're both here today is a testament to what any individual with autism is capable of. Like you said, erasing that kind of approach to it as a difficulty being a straight up barrier and seeing it as something to kind of overcome. Now, on that note, what can you tell us about your own personal contribution to this conference?
Yes, be glad to. I am here to combine my personal experiences as an autistic person with my practical or hands-on experience in working and supporting autistic people with my academic research experience to make fulfilling and productive lives for autistic individuals the rule rather than the exception. And my topic for this conference was what is known as the hidden curriculum. The hidden curriculum describes all those unspoken rules that everybody seems to understand, and they're not written. You don't find them anywhere, not in an employer's manual, not in a student code of conduct. And it's called hidden because it's unseen until something about us being autistic causes us to miss some sort of unspoken rule, and we smack right into it, and it suddenly bursts into full view. and the recognition that we need to learn these unspoken rules. Some of the strategies that I talk about were born from my own experiences in missing these unspoken rules.
I think that that idea of calling it like a hidden curriculum, I think that that's a fantastic way of approaching it. And I imagine that that's probably one of the things that can be the largest struggle, because like you said, it's not written anywhere and it kind of changes as well depending on who you're dealing with. So giving someone like a starting point for that, I think that that's just incredible. And now to move on to you, Mr. Russell, I'd like to ask you a little bit about what was your own view of this year's conference.
Well, this is my first time in Bahrain, so I was happy to be a part of the conference, and I'm enjoying my time here. The view so far of this conference is there's a lot of passionate people here. I mean, autism, it hits close to home for a lot of people, you know, whether you know somebody or whether it's in your family. And I think everybody at this conference just wants to get together to learn how we can love not just, you know, people with autism better, but love each other better. How can we all support each other in this journey that autism is a part of, right? And I think my impression is, you know, there's a lot of awareness out there, which is great. But there needs to be more awareness, in my view, of the struggles of autism, because for me, autism has brought a heck of a lot of difficulty in my life, but that is also the reason I became successful, right? I found my success because of the struggle, not in spite of it, and that's what I like to bring to the table, is realizing there's no shame in struggling. You know, you're not weak when you have a difficult day. You actually have to be your strongest to get through that difficult day, right? It's reshaping the perspective of what it means to be autistic, because I think there's so many misconceptions out there and stigmas and stereotypes. And if I can, you know, kind of rehumanize autism and therefore rehumanize humanity, I think we can all come together and realize, yeah, we all struggle at times, and individuals on the spectrum might need a little bit more support, but they also have a lot of extraordinary gifts that they can give back to society that not many people can give.
It's like you said, part of raising awareness is kind of not shying away from the struggles either. And I think a lot of us, when you give it at face value, raising awareness, we always kind of try to think of the positives, or we try to think like, oh, this is just how it kind of is, and it's a very abstract kind of idea, right?
Yeah.
But when you actually share those struggles, and it's like you said, it brings that humanity to the table, and you're actually, even if you can't fully kind of empathize with it, you can kind of think of enough of a similar situation to at least put yourself in that person's shoes. Now, yeah, there is unfortunately a lot of stigma, and unfortunately in that case, there are a lot of people maybe who might suspect that they may be on the spectrum, but maybe kind of refuse to get diagnosed. So in your opinion, how important is getting that diagnosis?
I think knowledge is power, right? I think, you know, if you are struggling, or if you're not struggling that much, but you think you have some autistic traits, I think seeking out a diagnosis, while it can be scary because it can challenge, you know, your identity and who you thought you were this whole time, it's also knowledge. And if you can accept that, what comes your way, I mean, it's self-awareness basically, and if you have that diagnosis, you can have a framework and a roadmap, right? It brought me closure, even though I was diagnosed at age 12. It took a while for me to get diagnosed, but once I had the diagnosis, it gave me a framework and closure, and things started to make sense. I could connect the dots, and therefore things got a little bit easier because I knew the why. There was no questioning, why am I like this? I knew why now. And I think, you know, that is huge when it comes to self-acceptance, because there are a lot of individuals who are different and, you know, autistic, they're different, and society is not that accepting of those who don't fit in, right? And so again, even though I like being different, I don't like feeling different. And that is something that, you know, I have to accept that, yeah, I am different, and that means I'm gonna feel different, but to be able to be empowered by that rather than ashamed of it, I think a diagnosis can help in a big, big way.
I think what you said really brought the point home, the idea of liking being different, but, you know, nobody wants to feel kind of ostracized or feel like they're out on the fringes. I'd like to ask you, Dr. Stephen, now we've touched on the fact that there are a lot of misconceptions regarding autism. So how do we kind of separate the fact from fiction?
The best way to do that is to get to know autistic people. Get to know people like myself, like Russell over here, and other autistic individuals. And as Russell so eloquently said, put a human face on to autism, because we're just as human as anybody else. And one way to look at autism is that it's an extension of the diversity of the human gene pool. And what that suggests is that we're going to have some areas that we have incredible strengths and incredible abilities. And yet at the same time, there'll be some areas where we're significantly challenged and will need a lot of support. Often there isn't that much in the middle. And it's this characteristic that is often confusing to people who encounter us, autistic individuals, and even can be confusing to us as well. How can this person be so good at this, but have a significant challenge at that? And one example, a personal example, is that at age 4, I was found by my parents taking apart a watch, very much like this, with a sharp knife. I'd pop open the back, remove the motor, extract some of the gears, spin them around, and then put it all back together again. And the watch still worked, and there weren't any pieces left over. So in order to take apart a watch, especially without the correct tools, you need very good, very well-developed what are known as fine motor controls. And these are the controls that fine motor control enables you to button your shirt, zip, tie your shoes, as compared to gross motor control, which is big body movement. So something that was always curious to me is that how could I be so good at taking apart watches, but when it came to penmanship, which also requires small motor, fine motor control, I was a complete disaster. And one of the worst things I could experience in school would be to walk into a room with a paragraph on the board. Because what that suggested is that we were going to have to copy it down, and by the end of the period, I'd only gotten through a few words, and everybody else had finished and gone to recess. Now, there's some interesting neurological explanations for that you can get from your favorite occupational therapist. In addition, this is an example of that widely varying skill set. So good at taking apart small devices, but that sharp line is crossed when it came to writing.
There was something that you said about like the variety of like the human gene pool, right? No one is really going to think the same way. Nobody's going to react to stimulus the same way.
Right.
While you were telling me that story, all I could think about was if I did something like that, if I tried to take apart a watch, I would probably destroy the room that I was in from the effort alone. And you know, anybody who knows me knows that I have very bad spatial awareness. But you know, for some people that stuff kind of comes naturally. We all think in very different ways. I'm not very good with numbers. I don't know if you guys can relate to that. But you know, there are different types of information that seem to come easier to some individuals. And I imagine, you know, it's sort of there in the name, autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
There's a variety of things, and I imagine a multitude of ways that it can manifest. And you know, there is that, and you can tell me if this is a myth or not, but there is often that idea that people with autism generally have this one topic in particular on which they are almost naturally an expert. You know, I don't know if that's true or not. Feel free to correct me on that.
Many of us are, but many of us aren't as well. So it's a myth that every autistic person is going to be sometimes what is termed as a savant in one particular area. That may or may not be true. I think it may be only 10% of us. And,
Okay, wow, that's a little sad then.
And you brought up a very important point as you were talking about diversity, and that is the topic of neurodiversity. And what neurodiversity refers to is the fact that there's incredible differences, and you were just talking about it, between how people process information, the way their brains receive information, process it, and then express it. That's neurodiversity. The human race is incredibly neurologically diverse. Now, when we talk about autistic people, we're considered as being neurodivergent, which means that we differ more than most other people. And that also includes, for example, people with ADHD, dyslexia, synesthesia, and various other conditions.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's almost staggering just to think about the ways of how different we all are. And it's great now that we can have a conversation about it, because you know, it eases communication, first of all. Any of those, like, you know, for example, we're talking about, like, you mentioned, like, the hidden curriculum, you know, and it's almost like, I imagine it would feel akin almost to someone, you know, going to a culture they've never been before, you know, reaching out, you know, for a handshake, or, you know, using a term that, you know, for you would be all right.
Yeah.
Actually saying all right, for example, I mean, I still remember in the UK, all right is used as hi, you know, for example. That was something that, you know, when I was there, and I grew up there, but I'd gone after a long time, and it was kind of like, why are they just asking me all right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like you have something missing, and you're trying to, without any instruction, you have to try to connect those threads.
Right.
Now, on that note, you've both been able to make the most out of your experiences, and clearly you've both managed to reach such heights. I'd like to ask you both individually to tell me a little bit about how autism kind of put you on the trajectory that you currently are on, starting with you, Dr. Stephen.
All right, so when I think about autism, it makes me think of what I call the 4 A's of autism. And these 4 A's are a set of, you could almost think of them as developmental steps that people go through. I've also seen entire countries go through these steps as well, organizations, groups, individual groups. And the first A is awareness. And we've been at awareness, you might say, national and international organizations, making society aware of autism. So we've gotten from a point to where autism, back when I was diagnosed and back when I was in school, was thought to be a very rare, severe psychiatric condition caused by poor mothering. Now we know better, and the Center for Disease Control and Disease Prevention in Atlanta accepts an incidence rate of 1 in 36. That's a lot of autism. And we've gotten so much better at recognizing autism, whether it's at home, in education, in employment, in the community, and increasing numbers of autistic people reading about it and saying, well, gee whiz, I think that's me, and now I'm going to get that confirmed with a more formal diagnostic procedure. So that's the foundation, awareness. The next step is acceptance. And when we talk about my parents, first they became aware that I was autistic at 18 months when I was struck with what I call the regressive autism bomb, where 30% of us on the spectrum, we develop typically, and then there's a regression, and I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment, and in brief, I became a very autistic little kid. Because there was so little known about autism, again, lack of awareness, the doctors who had seen me said, well, we've never seen such a sick child, send him off to an institution. Well, fortunately, my parents, like we see ever increasing numbers of parents around the world, here in Bahrain as well, they advocated on my behalf, and they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year they implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program, using strategies that we'd see in the Aliyah Center that now have names to them. And that's when we turn towards the acceptance phase. My parents accepted me for who I was, and yet realized that there was a lot of work that needed to be done if I were to lead a fulfilling and productive life. So they did get to work. And I think the most important breakthrough was after their initial attempts to get me to imitate them. Imitation is a time-honored educational strategy. Everybody in the studio has used imitation. Everybody in the world uses it. I'll show you how to do it. You do it like this. Okay, now you do it. That's imitation. But perhaps due to a difference in mirror neurons, it didn't work for me, as it doesn't work for many. So my parents, upon having a framework of acceptance, they flipped it, and then they imitated me. And once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment. And then they were able to move me along. And I believe the vital implications are, 1, meet the individual where they are. 2, develop a trusting relationship. From there, you can move on. And I think that holds true for everybody else everybody, autistic or otherwise. So we're at the first two stages, acceptance. It's also shown when we transition from trying to change the autistic person to become more like a non-autistic person, which doesn't work anyways. You just get a poor imitation of a typical person, to working with the strengths and the interests. So in school, for example, you have a child having difficulty in math. We also see they have a favorite activity. Let's say it's using a flight simulator. And we set up a program, meet your math goals, then you can do your favorite activity. But that's working against the characteristics of autism. Working with would be, okay, I recognize this highly focused interest. Well, I think there's plenty of math involved in flying airplanes. And then math becomes more interesting. So then we get to the third step. And that third step is appreciation. And that is when we see autistic people being valued for what we can contribute to society. So for example, I'm valued at my university at being able to bring the autistic experience to teaching my students on how to better support autistic individuals. Now we have Russell over here, who's valued for bringing humanity, introducing humanity or reintroducing humanity to autism. And we're both valued for bringing that inside view. We see large IT companies actively seeking autistic individuals because some of us can engage in computerized geekery at levels that nobody else can. Not all of us, it's a myth, there's another myth, that all of us are IT geeks. It's a small portion, big enough for them to notice. But we also have to ask, what about everybody else? And how are we going to provide these supports? And then that fourth A is action. And action is all the work that we put in to making those first three A's work. And my parents, at the very beginning, accepting me for who I was, and then working with me as opposed to against me, is what set my initial trajectory, combined with an intense curiosity as to why things work the way they work, whether it's watches, bicycles, music, whatever it may be.
I think that, you know, the way that you added that, the 4 A's, I think that those are perfectly succinct and actually very practical steps as well for explaining, you know, what the experience is kind of like. And then not only that, but the way that you brought it in is the involvement of, for example, your parents, or
Right.
even the example that you gave with education. Because, you know, it's always about communication at the end of the day, whenever we're talking about other people. And it doesn't necessarily just mean the words that we're saying. We're not just talking about like linguistics, but also meeting people where they're at. I think that's important. It's crucial no matter who you are, you
Right.
know, or whatever the topic is. You know, that's kind of how you get people, that's how you can best communicate with them, and that's how you can best kind of reach them. And now, moving on to you, Mr. Russell, could you tell us a little bit about how your experience set you on the trajectory you're on now?
Yeah, I guess my experience with autism that helped propel me to where I am now is, again, kind of the quote-unquote dark side of it, the struggle. You know, I am not an outlier when it comes to my situation. It took 12 years for me to get a diagnosis, and then after that diagnosis, I never received the adequate supports I deserved. And so I ultimately became a social recluse for nearly 15 years, and I was in my mid-20s living with my parents. I had never had a job before. My last friend was at age 12. I never lived out my teenage years. Autism, I like to say autism took from me everything I ever wanted, but in turn it gave me everything I ever needed. Because in that isolation, being that social outcast, while it was painful and hurt, I also had all the time in the world to get to know myself, learn about what I truly was passionate about, why I could get through the struggle, what made me get through the struggle, what was my purpose to get through that struggle. And ultimately it was unpacking my struggles for others to help them in their similar struggles. And so autism is very challenging for me. You know, it is for me very much disabling condition. I also have a lot of dual diagnoses, mental health conditions that are very common when it comes to autism. And those make life very difficult for me. And so the majority of my life I was discounted, left out, kind of set to the side. Society forgot about me. And that frustration of always being forgotten by society, being left out, not included, that frustration grew into an inner fire to try not to let this happen to other people, because I knew how much it hurt. And so it's my career is based on, again, my struggle. It's a very healing aspect of my career, very cathartic for me to relay the unpleasant experiences in my life to give people foresight, use my hindsight to develop foresight for others. So I was able to kind of turn it on its head. Autism, again, put a lot of roadblocks in front of me, but it put me on a detour in life that detour actually turned out to be the main road for me.
I mean, I think that you've just perfectly demonstrated the mentality you were talking about earlier. For example, showing that the struggles, but also showing that, like you guys have said, overcoming it and turning it into something positive. And, I can't imagine what that was like, but clearly you've managed to kind of channel it into something positive. And, for that, I mean, I suppose sometimes, if you want to forge something, you've got to take the heat, basically. Yeah. That's just kind of the unfortunate truth, but you came out of it, clearly, you've got, like you said, a fire in you, and it shows. And we're glad for that outcome, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of families and individuals with autism tend to. It's a very humbling experience. For me, I fall flat on my face often, and I realize how small I am, and that to zoom out and see things in a larger perspective and not be so zoomed in on, succeeding as the society wants me to succeed or anything. Autism for me really keeps in the forefront of my mind what truly matters in this world, for me anyway, and that's personal connection and the experiences I have. Those two things are the only thing I'm going to be thinking about on my deathbed, and that's how I try to live my life.
Brilliantly said, and I think that those are great things really to focus your life on. They're definitely worth the effort. And now, Dr. Stephen, you famously said that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Now, I can kind of glean what you mean by that, but in your own words, could you explain that to us?
Yes, and you've met one person with autism, or you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And what that refers to is the incredible diversity we find within the autism spectrum. So we take a look at Russell and I. We're both autistic. We've got a lot of differences, a lot of similarities. I think we make a great contrast, and it's great to have you here with me because it's a great example of the differences and the diversity that we see within the autism spectrum at all levels of autism. So as we look at autism and we consider the definition, which starts with the word deficits in, but I prefer to use the word differences in. Communication, social interaction, repetitive motions, restricted interests, although I prefer to use highly focused interests, sensory challenges. And for example, there are autistic people who have more support needs than us and would not be able to communicate in the way we're communicating with you. We are bound together with these individuals through differences in communication. For some individuals, it means not being able to speak, not being neurologically being able to speak, but when given a different way of communicating, such as an assistive communication device, pointing at pictures on an iPad, for example, then we find they may have the same range of intelligence as the rest of us. So it's that communication difference. Us, we seem to use words pretty well, but then again, we may tend to monologue on topics, breaking rules of hidden curriculum, you might say, and not giving another person a chance to talk. And that's just one example of how we're bound together by the definition, and yet within the definition we see incredible diversity.
And I suppose that's the importance of having the holistic approach to everything, and it's a very individual experience, like you all said, and to see it manifest so differently. I mean, I'm sure there is a lot that you guys have in common, but at the same time, actually, I'm glad that you brought up the example of you, Mr. Russell, because you are both very clearly individual people. without you guys sharing the shared traits like in your stories, I mean, I would have no way of linking one person to the other. So yeah, I mean, I think that that's a great point to bring up, and it's one. I think that that's one message that really needs to be like nailed in.
Right.
Absolutely.
And moving on to you, Mr. Russell, society's understanding of autism is growing. What is the best way that we can kind of reach as many people and get them involved with the experience and help them understand it better?
Well, I think the biggest incentive for society at large to pay more attention to autism is that you see that the accommodations that autistic people need actually benefit everybody, right? Like, you know, the sensory quiet rooms, like who doesn't need that at times, right? A quiet environment to just kind of chill out for a little bit. I think, you know, there's a lot of unpacking the autism experience that, again, I call autism an exacerbation of the human condition. For me, everything's just kind of turned up a lot, you know, it's like living life without a filter. It's very raw, it's very exhausting, it's depleting. But if I can unpack that, others can generalize that and find it actually relatable, right? You know, again, it's just it's a spectrum of the human condition, and the autism spectrum is almost as wide as the human spectrum. And I think, you know, the biggest thing is to, again, meet me where I'm at, but also realize that it's an investment. Let me say that, you know. For me, again, it took me a long time to bloom, so to speak. I'm 33 years old now, and I'm only just beginning. And I think that's true for a lot of individuals and their families with autism. They're not going to hit the typical milestones. Everything's going to be delayed. But if people outside of the autism community can give them the support they need, they will do amazing things. It might take a little longer, but they'll do amazing things. And that's, you know, better than not doing anything. And I think society really needs to have more patience and see, you know, what we're capable of. Because again, you think of autism, and if you don't have any personal relation to it, you might be aware of the word, but not necessarily the world of it. And the world is so rich, and I think we need to bring people who know nothing about autism into the world of autism, and they can look around and see, wow, this actually isn't that different than my world.
Exactly. I mean, it kind of goes back to like kind of what I was saying earlier. Like, again, everything's an abstract until you actually see what people are going through.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's bringing communities together, especially. I think people don't understand even if you're neurotypical, like if you think about it, all it takes sometimes is for one kind word or for one person to be patient with you when your entire day, your entire mood can change.
Yeah.
So, I mean, imagine just a bit more of that for the people who may need it even more, just like an extra minute of someone's time, an extra effort to get how someone learns. I mean, I don't think that would take a lot out of anyone, really. Now, moving on to you, Dr. Stephen, many parents, they send their children to ABA centers to prepare them for a typical school experience. And what, if any, circumstances would have to exist in such a center to qualify it as good preparation for a school?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you have clinicians and therapists striving to understand the autistic person as an individual. So getting back to that discussion, the individuality between autistic people, and to strive to understand why perhaps certain behaviors are occurring, which can range anywhere from difficulties in communication to sensory issues to medical challenges, whatever it might be, if it's deemed that a behavior has to be changed or modified. So getting to know the individual, avoiding the trap of modifying behaviors and losing the humanity of the child. So I think that would be the most important thing, a desire for deep understanding of each child as an individual.
Brilliantly said, and that's something I would hope that all teachers aspire to anyway. But like you said, especially if someone, I keep thinking about the example that you brought up earlier. For example, the flight simulator in math. I think that in general, that is a great way to really, if someone's already got that attention, they've got that focus on something, you know, really contextualizing it in a way that they'll actually enjoy.
Right.
I think is a great way in order to meet someone basically where they're at, you know. That phrase I think is crucial, so, at least so far that's what I'm getting.
Right. Working with the person, not against the person. And also something that you bring up, as you said, a wonderful way to work with people is riffing off of what Russell said, autistic people are human, perhaps just a little bit more so or intensively so. In working with educators and working with supervisors in workplaces, in learning how to better support their autistic students or employees, a common theme that I get as feedback is, well, you know, all this work that I've done to better understand how to communicate with my autistic student, employee, all these strategies that I've learned and used has actually made me a better teacher or supervisor overall. So it's really just a matter of good practice, be it education or employment or whatever it might be. And then, because autistic people are a study of extremes, turning it up a notch or two as needed.
Brilliantly said. And again, I would add to that communication.
Yes.
Because clearly being able to really reach
Right.
out to your students or to anybody else who needs it. And now, building on that, I'd like to ask you how field research contributes to the progress of successful dealing with intellectual disabilities and autism spectrum disorder. Like, what can you tell us about your efforts along with other specialists when it comes to research?
Yeah, research is a fascinating area, and my belief is that whatever you're researching in has to be meaningful for the community you're researching on. So in this case, the autistic community. And currently my research is focused on what is known as participatory action research. And what that means is that you involve the community in the research. So I'll give you a brief example. A colleague and I got it in our heads that we wanted to study what is the most challenging healthcare issue facing autistic people. And we thought, well, we could ask a number of doctors and other medical professionals, therapists and so on, what do you think is the most challenging healthcare issue facing autistic individuals? And get some good answers and probably get it published, and that would all be good. However, wouldn't it be better if, number one, we asked autistic people, what is this challenge? And then number two, making it even more powerful, let's involve autistic people in all aspects of the research according to their desires, according to their abilities. So what we did is we established a team lead group, half autistic, half not, just to show that us autistic people could be inclusive of non-autistic people to do our work. And then two, we set up a community council of mostly autistic individuals to help us guide the research. So 2 conferences later, a number of surveys, focused groups, what bubbled to the top was access to mental health supports. That is what is most on autistic people's minds. And this makes, and because we involve the autistic community so deeply, I believe that gave us a more meaningful result. Well, that project has ended, and we're now continuing our work with this community council, and we're now involved in a $9.1 million 5-year grant from Patient Care Outcome Research Institute, in which to compare 2 interventions in suicide prevention. Because another thing that we do know is that suicide is one of the leading causes of death in autistic people. So this is where we should be putting our efforts, and we're making use of the community council to make sure that our strategies, how we implement these strategies, how the clinicians will interact with their clients are in a way that is meaningful to autistic people. So I look forward to getting those results. We're in year 2 of this 5-year grant and seeing which approach seems to work better. And my suspicion is what we're going to find is that approach A is going to work better with a certain type of autistic person, and type B will probably work better with this other type of autistic person. And that goes also with my belief that we need to match techniques and strategies and approaches to individual profiles.
I mean, again, it always comes down to that, doesn't it? The human or the individual at the heart
That's
of
right.
it.
Yeah.
and that kind of being able to communicate with them in a way that's kind of like on their terms. It's always kind of, you're always going to be met with a lot more results if you go in knowing the language, well, I'll use language for a lack of a better term, that the person speaks. And if you can appeal to them and if you can include them as well, I think that is a huge part of it as well. It's that combination. And I think that combination is a great way of stripping down the walls that lead to stuff like stigma and misunderstandings and all of that. And I really can't wait to see if you're, at the end of the day, what the results prove. I think that's a brilliant endeavor, and I wish you all the best in it.
Thank you.
Now, just before we wrap up, I'd like to ask the both of you, is there anything, any message, anything you'd like to say to our viewers?
Yeah, one more thing, maybe a couple of things. One is, some of you may be wondering why I'm wearing this hat. And most people perceive this hat as a fashion statement. And in many ways it is, and of course it's always good to support my university, Adelphi University in New York, where I teach and do my research. But in actuality, it is an accommodation. Because as an autistic person with sensory differences, for me, being under recessed lighting fixtures, like we have many in this room, is probably like looking into a spotlight for most other people. So here is the accommodation. Another thing is that it's also important to realize that the potential of autistic people is unlimited, just like with everybody else. And it's up to us, those of us who are involved in this conference here by the Alia Center, Untangling Autism, anyone who supports autistic individuals, and including those of us who are autistic, we need to find ways to maximize that potential.
Brilliantly said. And you, Mr.
Thanks.
Russell?
Gosh, I would say my journey, like many others with autism, it has been a long, arduous journey. And sometimes parents and individuals with autism, we get frustrated because we're focusing so much on our destination, and that's not occurring because autism can get in the way of that. And I think if we can again zoom out and realize, yeah, it's not so much about the destination, it's not so much even about the journey, but really it's about the scenery around you on that journey, to look around and see what's in front of you. I think autism, again, can redefine what life is. I mean, autism brings me a lot of struggles, but also makes life incredibly beautiful, and you can't have one without the other. You have to have both. And so again, I just want to say that, yeah, there are going to be times when, you know, families and individuals are going to get tired and, you know, not want to be autistic at times and feel like they just want the normal path, so to speak. But it's a special path, and it's a path that very few people get to actually see up close and personal. And everybody can tell you that when they are on that path, whether it's a family member with autism, whether they have autism, a friend, that path, while it may be very difficult, it's, again, incredibly beautiful, enlightening, and I think it makes you a better human overall because you have more compassion and open-mindedness towards anybody. And again, that diversity that we talked about, that is the human condition.
Brilliantly said. It was such a pleasure to have the both of you here. I learned a lot from our
Likewise.
talk, and I know for a fact that our viewers will learn a lot from it as well. I can't wait to see what you guys do next. Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much.
Viewers, don't go away. We'll be right back with more on Bahrain Now. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at what's going on beyond the studio in the following report.
Year after year, Bahrain International Circuit hosts the Formula One Bahrain Grand Prix, which has become known as one of the most exciting races of the Formula One season. 20 years of making history is the name given to this year's race, as Bahrain International Circuit celebrates the 20th anniversary of hosting Formula One races in Bahrain. This year's race also kicks off as the opening round in the new Formula One 2024 season calendar, consisting of 24 races on the International Automobile Federation's calendar.
One of the here today, as a new member of the Formula One club. It is a club that spans the globe, thanks to the very diligent efforts of Mr. Ecclestone here next to me. It represents excellence, it represents competitiveness, and it represents quality. And above all else, Those are the elements that we would like to see fostered inside Bahrain. So we've just given you a very small taste here tonight of what you can expect when you come out there. But I can guarantee that you will have a young country, an eager country, and a country that will welcome you with open arms.
The home of motorsports in the Middle East, this phrase confirms Bahrain history since 2004, after opening the circuit and hosting the first race in the region, which entered a new era in hosting major international sporting events. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and Prime Minister Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa had a prominent role in adopting this project, which strengthened Bahrain's position in international sports circles to fulfill the vision of His Majesty the King.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've made it to the finish line. A huge thank you to all of our guests for joining us tonight. Another huge thank you to all of you watching us at home. As always, be sure to reach out to us on our social media accounts shown below. We love to hear from you. This was Khalid Hijris, and until next time, good night and God bless.